You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home, the podcast where we explore the people, ideas, and systems shaping housing and homelessness responses across Canada. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and today I'm joined by Ala'a Shadid, Executive Director of the Multifaith Housing Initiative, an organization bringing together faith communities, partners, and housing providers to deliver and sustain affordable housing. Ala'a's work sits at a unique intersection, managing complex housing operations while also driving long-term systems change. His leadership offers a perspective on how organizations can move beyond crisis response towards more sustainable, coordinated approaches to housing. Let's listen in. Welcome to the show, Ala'a. We're so excited to have you on. We are going to start with our signature question. What does home mean to you?
Well, thank you so much, Emmy, for inviting me to the show. Most people normally think of a home as the four walls and the roof, but to me, home means slightly different. It's health, opportunity, meaning, and equity. It's the foundation that allows people to stabilize, to breathe, to plan beyond just getting through the day. When that foundation is strong, I believe everything else becomes possible. And when that's missing, everything becomes reactive. So home at its core is about dignity, stability, and long-term possibility. What I've seen so far, when people have a stable housing, you start to see improvements in everything else, in health, in employment, education, and of course, relationships. And that's when you realize home is not the actual end goal. It's actually the starting point.
You know, for our listeners, for anyone who hasn't met Ala'a, I will say that he is an incredibly passionate leader. I met Ala'a first when he was at CCOC, leading the work there with the facilities and everything. And Ala'a, I just can't ignore the amount of drive you have and the way that you never want to settle when it comes to housing. You believe that we can do better and you take the actions to do better. And so I'd love to hear a bit about your passion, the journey that led you into housing, what fuels your passion, what do you hope to achieve? Please share with us.
Well, thank you again, Emmy. I really appreciate that very kind introduction. One, I just wanted to say our industry, sky is the limit, and that's my initial thought when I am thinking about our industry as a whole. And, to be honest, my journey did not start in housing at all. Many years ago, I graduated civil engineering. I started my career to work in the hotel industry as a customer relationship manager. And when I moved to Ottawa, I started to look for the non-for-profit and to start to understand the non-for-profit. And I could not get it out. And I don't think I will ever get it out. So my journey into housing came from understanding, honestly, one thing: housing is not just a service. It's the infrastructure. And when that foundation is weak, everything built on top struggles. And what fuels me is the opportunity to strengthen not just housing delivery, but how we operate, how we plan, and we sustain these systems, and how we sustain these systems over time. Because when we get this kind of things right, the impact goes far beyond housing itself. In practice, I've seen how gaps in housing systems create pressures everywhere else, in healthcare, in social services, and in the actual communities. So the work becomes about strengthening the foundation so everything else can function much, much better.
And now that you are leading the Multifaith Housing Initiative at a time when I think we can all agree that housing challenges are incredibly complex, how would you describe your role at the intersection of operations, community development, systems change, and the huge need that there is across Canada to be building non-market housing right now?
Well, I see my role as connecting three things: what happens on the ground, what communities actually need, and how the system is designed. Operations tell you what's real, community tells you what matters. And system thinking ensures that what you build can last for a very long time. My role is to align all these three main pillars together. So what we deliver today, it's not just responsive, but sustainable and scalable. What that often means is translating complexity per se, taking what we see day to day and turning it into much better decisions, better systems, and better outcome over time.
And so, like, maybe we'll expand on that a little bit. Like, when you're looking at the day-to-day challenges and realities, how do you balance that with the bigger picture thinking, the long-term strategies that you need to take, as well as delivering the day-to-day important?
That's actually a very excellent question, because a lot of people think of the day to day and big picture, oh, I have to be multitasker to be able to do it. Well, I am strongly believe that multitasking is just a myth. We have to focus on one thing at a time to be able to deliver, or to be able to focus on the outcome rather than just the number of tasks that we're doing. So the day-to-day is where the best insights come from, of course. And what I focus on is building structure, clear priorities, strengthen my team as much as possible, and consistent systems. So the organization can operate effectively today without losing the directions for tomorrow. If you only react, you lose direction. And if you only plan for long term, you lose credibility, of course. The balance is making both in informing each other one way or another. What I've learned is when systems are clear, you create space to think very long term. And without that structure, you get pulled back into consistent reactions.
Tell me about multitasking being a myth.
Well,
What did you say to that one?
Well, when we say multitasking, it's not just about thinking about two different ideas at the same time. You will never be able to write two emails, at the same time. We never is able to do two things or two main things in our lives at the same time. Now people think just because I am per se driving and talking to a friend or my wife, I am multitasking. In reality, no, it's actually one of them. It's taken more of my actionable brain than the other. So, I believe it's multitasking. It's not something that is 100% real. Our nature is to do multiple things at the same time. But of course, our focus ultimately is on one thing at the time. Best example, open two emails in front of you. Can you read them both at the same time? No.
I feel like when I worked in Jordan, there was this, I don't know how to say it in Arabic, but they would say, chase two rabbits, you'll lose
both.
Yeah.
and that's it's not to degrade the idea of multitasking. It's more of to put an emphasis on the importance of the work that we do. That each item of them, some folks would think that the day-to-day sometimes is more important the long term, but actually they are integrated into each other. Thinking of the day to day is actually a better plan for the future.
Yeah. So maybe we'll go back, like the times that I've chatted with you, there's a certain level of discontent with how we do the work we do in the sector, which is a good thing. I feel like, you acknowledge we have certainly not arrived. We have so much to do. And I want to just circle back to what you were talking about, systems and the work that you do every day. And I guess I'm wondering if you can talk with us a bit about shifting from the crisis response to long-term systems thinking, what you think that will require, what that shift looks like in practice for housing organizations from your view.
Absolutely. Well, it's a shift in the mindset, I believe. If from asking how do we get through this year to asking what needs to be in place so this organization is still very strong in 20, 30, 40 years from today. In practice, that means predictable operating models, realistic capital planning, not too crazy, strong governance. A crisis will always exist regardless of what we think or what we do.
What do you think needs to change for the sector to move forward to more proactive and sustainable solutions?
Well, I believe the most important thing we need to do at first is to stop normalizing crisis, that it is totally normal, and start building for stability. That means investing in capacity, in systems, and long-term planning, not just projects. Sustainability comes when organizations are designed to endure, not just to survive. You know, I believe, from my experience, that also means giving organizations the space to plan ahead, not just respond to immediate pressures, because consistent reactions is not really a sustainable model. It's just something we do by nature as humans.
I love that. Stop normalizing crisis. You heard it here. I really think that's so important. It speaks so much to the reality of the work sometimes, and also the decisions that have to be made within a certain term or time frame to deal with crisis that aren't necessarily the right approach for the long term.
Absolutely.
So changing our thinking to stop normalizing the crisis is a great starting point. And I'll switch to partnerships for a moment that seem very central to your work. What does meaningful collaboration look like across public, private, and nonprofit sectors from your view?
Well, a meaningful collaboration is a collaboration that is very well structured, not just well intentioned. It requires clear rules between all of the parties, clear decision making, and a shared understanding of all of the risks, no matter how big or no matter how small they are. No single sector can deliver housing at scale alone. That is a proven fact. But when each partner does what they do best, that's when impact really, really happens. A good example is when roles are clearly defined, you avoid duplications and you move faster with some, or actually not some, with a very good amount of clarity. And that's when partnerships actually deliver results.
And I think when you talk about meaningful partnerships, what would you say is a partnership that actually works versus one that looks good on paper but falls short? And maybe if you would share with listeners as well, if you have one off the top of your head, an example of a partnership that you feel really works, or that is like a possibility model for for housing organizations that might be looking for ideas or, listening and would love to advance more meaningful partnerships in their work?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start with an example and then I'll answer your question. Multifaith Housing Initiative, we do have a project. We name it, or it is called the ODNAC, and it is in LeBreton Flats here in Ottawa, and it is a large complex. It's 2 towers, 608 units. 133 of these units will be affordable housing, and they are for us, for MHI. And of course, that project has many different layers of partnership. We have a Dream is our main contractor, and we have partnership with the federal government, provincial government, municipal government. So I can tell you, it cannot get more complex than this, but it cannot be more positive outcome than this also.
You've been involved in governance and organizational integration. What are some of the biggest internal challenges housing organizations face as they grow or merge?
Well, as you know, Multifaith Housing went through a major amalgamation about a year and a half ago between Multifaith Housing Initiative and Gloucester Housing. And I can say that, this particular amalgamation, it's a very complementary amalgamation, or the two organizations complementing each other's. And, the biggest challenge is alignment across systems, processes, and of course, culture. And culture can mean, the culture between the tenants and the culture also between the staff and the governance level on the board and the different committees. You are not just combining portfolios, you are integrating ways of work. Without structure and stabilization, complexity creates friction. So clarity and consistency are critical early on, especially in the stages when we start thinking about how these systems, how these cultures can become one. In practice, if you don't address these kind of things early, you end up with confusion, delays, and inconsistent outcomes, and that affects both staff and tenants, of course.
Can we dive a little more into the amalgamation and like the continuum of service that you've achieved through that amalgamation, and what Multifaith is doing as a result today? Like, can you share a little more with our listeners who might not know?
Okay, well, so you want it more in depth about the amalgamation in general?
Yeah, like sharing with us a bit about what the organization's up to now and kind of what happened there in terms of the amalgamation, like why strategically that decision was made, and then as a result, like when we think about the housing market, like why did that happen? How is it helping? And where are you at now?
Absolutely. Well, I'll make it in simple terms just to give you an idea. So, Multifaith Housing Initiative had a number of units, and they do have, or they they had a number of staff members, and they were covering community engagement. They were covering fundraising department, and Gloucester Housing had stuff that's or the departments that Gloucester Housing were totally different. For example, facilities management, rentals, and finance. So these are the items that MHI did not have in the past, but MHI had departments that Gloucester Housing never had in the past. And that's why, I mean, it is very complementary amalgamation between the two organizations, and so each organization were under 300 units before amalgamation. Right now, we are at 422. We're going to be in a year time at our magic number, 555 units. And, I believe that that's one of the directions where, not necessarily it's all bad. It can be extremely important for our sector, and it's extremely meaningful to our staff and our tenants.
So when you spoke about the magic number, which I'm guessing was more for fun, or is there actually a
No,
science?
it is actually, we do have ODNAC, like I was just speaking about a minute ago, the 133 units that we're getting, they will be completed and ready for the new tenants by 2027, by the end of 2027.
So your strategic goal is actually 555.
Yes.
That's so awesome. Who does that? So now that we're talking about scaling, obviously there's importance of scaling responsibly. How can organizations expand their impact without losing their mission or stretching themselves too thin?
What reality is, scaling requires very strong discipline. You really need a clarity on a number of things. What you do well and where you add value and where you don't. A growth should strengthen the mission, not stretch it. And sometimes that means saying no to different opportunities just because it does not align properly with our strategic view or our strategic vision. And what I've learned is not every opportunity is the right opportunity, of course. And being disciplined about that particular thing is what protects the mission in a very, very long term. And I can, tell you, one of the examples, for example, Ottawa, it's a big land. So I have properties in the east end of Ottawa. I do have properties in the south. From the furthest property in the east to the furthest property in the south, roughly around anywhere between 35 and 40 kilometers. So operationally, to have one team member going back and forth, that's a waste or a lost time that, we cannot, it's a lost actually working time. Therefore, we have to be very strategic, or, my advice to anybody who wanted to expand is to make sure you strategize this, because it is one thing to just add number, but it is a totally different things when you really need to operate it. And you take so many different factors for that specific item to operate.
So I guess geographic impact as well. Does your team you said you do service delivery as well? Like you have supportive housing and stuff too?
No, we don't. Not supportive housing. You never know what happens in the future, but.
So like when you're referring even to being strategic about scaling and geographies and everything, that has to do obviously even with the maintenance of the properties and everything is what you're.
Absolutely. Well, quite recently, Emmy, I have been discussing with one of my committees about having a set of criteria. Per se, it's like from an engineering perspective, they call it the sieve system. Filtering different ideas, different opinions, or different opportunities. It cannot stay with an organization this big. Needs to have a steady flow, and that flow has to go through different kind of filtering. It cannot rely ultimately on the ED or only the board to make these decisions. It has to be within the organization to know, is this functionally or is this operationally a good idea? So what does that mean? And it includes all of these details from geographic locations, number of units, what type of units. Sometimes you get, our industry, it's very, very diverse industry. You get so many different types of units. Anybody who've worked in operations or in facilities, they know there are the environmental specific, for example, units. You need very specialized type of technicians and very specialized materials that can be used at these kind of units. So, it's all of that has to be taken into account from day one, before you even start thinking if this is something I want to go through, or I should take a step back and say no now. Otherwise, it's gonna put me at a critical situation down the road.
Yeah, that is very important. Before we close, I know that you're hopeful. Besides, of course, despite the challenges in the space, despite the crisis that the country's in right now, you're hopeful. What gives you hope right now, especially when it comes to standardizing the sector in such a fast evolving environment? What gives you hope that we will solve this as a nation? Please do share.
Absolutely.
I remember one time being in a meeting with you. Sorry to cut you off. I think it might have been a Ontario Nonprofit Housing Board meeting or another meeting, and we were all focused on, I'm sharing this with our listeners, we were all focused on what we need to do better, how we can improve, and then you piped in with sharing, actually, when we look at this objectively, you know what? Maybe I'm going to steal your thunder if I say this, so I'm going to let you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Say it.
Ala'a, you stood up and you said, Canada is a very, very young nation. We have been here for, 150 years, and we're talking about this like it's the end of the world. Like, we don't have, some nations have a very long, rich history. They have worked, towards solutions for a number of years, and yet we're so young, and there's so much energy in the space to create lasting change that works out well for our nation. And so you were at the time very hopeful that with all that energy and all the future that we can create that will eventually be a successful history, that you had a very optimistic outlook. Do you still?
Of course. Well, I'll tell you, I'm actually really happy to hear this story from you again, because, normally, a lot of people focuses on what's happening at that current or at that particular moment, and they forgot the way bigger picture. So, I just want to let you know, and our listeners, of course. So 20 years ago, I wasn't even in Canada. I was in Jordan. I lived in Jordan. My childhood, all of my childhood was in my home country. And Jordan is a country with many different civilizations for, I don't know, thousands, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years. So when I used to go to the ancient locations and I just walk by it, one thing keeps, hitting me, and that is, what? Housing have been in existence for so many thousands of years. That was the first thing every single human ever looked for. In the pyramid of needs, that's one of the most important things that they need. So, and when I came here, and I start working in the non-for-profit and the housing industry, I know everybody is thinking about it from their own lens, and they see it, as it's not moving fast, it's not happening fast. Well, again, everything needs time to develop. You cannot, number one, plan a very good meal without giving it enough time to cook. And right now, we are in that process. We are, every single thing that we do in our industry, it's moving this needle a little closer to where we wanted it to be. The sky is our limit. Canada is, I still continue to say it, Canada is a baby. 150 years, it's still, there is so much we can do. We have the most brilliant minds in the universe, and we can do so much. It's like, look at the map. Canada, it is and going to be one of, and it will maintain to be one of the top. It's just needs a bit of refinement every once in a while in different industry to be there. So to answer your question, what gives me hope is honestly the shift toward stronger systems and smarter stabilizations, not to be reactive as much, not to become rigid, but to create stability. When systems are clear, staff are, of course, supported, boards govern much better, and tenants receive consistent service. And consistency is one of the most important things to our valued tenants. In a growing sector like ours, stability is everything. What I am seeing now is more aligned around that idea a little bit. That structure and mission can actually reinforce, or it makes us reinforce each other. And I believe that's a very positive shift.
That's awesome. I'm going to throw you a bonus here.
Sure.
Ala'a, if you could wave a magic wand, what would it, like in the housing sector or across the sector, like what changes would you want to see happen in Canada? Like what would you do differently, or how would you set up the system differently?
I would standardize the system, that we all have one standard. We all work, all of these great hands, clapping aligned together to make a louder boom. It's one of the most important thing. We know exactly what our problems are. We know exactly what our needs and what we require, and we know exactly how to execute them. We do not need an external person to tell us what to do. We are the experts in this field, and that's what I am seeing a massive shift in. We are becoming a lot more aligned of what we want to see as a sector rather than to see as an individual.
When you talk about standardization for the sector, are you talking about like those who are delivering nonprofit housing? Are you talking about housing strategy across government, or all of it?
All of it.
And what would that look like?
Well, that will look like, something fascinating for, the country, number one, and, how it will function, or how it will be perceived as we are speaking with the same voice. Right now, it depends on which a province you are in, which municipality you are in, there is different standards. And, of course, when we are trying to tackle a national level crisis, we cannot be, if we are not aligned on one specific idea and on one specific approach, it just divide us more and more and more. So we have to be aligned on what the situation is, and we have to be aligned on what the end result we are looking to receive.
So if you could say anything, which, well, you can, because you're on the podcast, to our listeners about what you think actions we can take as individuals or organizations as part of this like housing network, what are actions that we can take before obviously utopia is achieved, every day or now, to kind of start bringing that alignment, standardization across systems and our work to strengthen the voice, I suppose, of, you know, housing, as housing is a human right. We're still far from achieving that goal right now. So what would you advise anyone listening as an action item today?
Well, I believe listen to what happens day to day and what's on the ground. I believe, and what I mean by that, similar to the question that you asked me about the day to day or long term, it's extremely important. I will split that into two sections. One, when you are listening carefully to what is happening in the ground, it's actually giving you not just the idea of what's going on in the ground, but actually it's giving you what the hopes is on the ground for the future. What I mean by that, it's the tenants, tenants or the number of people that we are trying to house and we are trying to support. They are the ones who the first feel the change before organizations or before industries feel the change. Therefore, if you have a good sense of what's happening on the ground and how the ground is moving, and the second section comes as empowering your staff. Empowering the staff is so important to be able to pivot between different things for a good delivery. Once these two are in sync with each other, then the organization can be able to see things slightly different. And therefore, when you add that to the number of organizations we have, it's a sectoral change. And that's what I mean by standardizing, by syncing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ala'a, for joining us on the show today. We so appreciated your insights, your leadership. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Emmy and Blue Door team, for everything. I know you are a very strong leader. I know you have been doing excellent and fabulous work in our industry. And it's to our listeners, thank you so much. I hope you get the answers from the questions. They're not easy questions from Emmy. They're never easy anyways. And hopefully one day I will be the one asking Emmy some questions.
For sure. Right back at you, my brother. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your leadership. Much appreciated.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
This episode featured Ala'a Shadid, Executive Director of the Multifaith Housing Initiative, whose leadership highlights the importance of balancing day-to-day operations with long-term systems thinking. His insights on partnerships, organizational growth, and sector evolution offer a practical and hopeful perspective on how housing organizations can scale their impact while staying grounded in their mission. Thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. Stay with us for more conversations shaping the future of housing.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.